So this was your first time watching this? I keep asking you this same question every time we do a podcast. I keep
Yes,
forgetting if
no,
you every time we do a podcast, I always forget, like, did you see this movie first or no?
I did see this movie before. Yes,
Okay.
I had the DVD, um, which I had put somewhere in a box. So I had to find it, which
Mhm.
turned out to be easier than I thought it might be. But yes, I had seen it way back, probably pretty close to after it came out, and I hadn't seen it since. So
So does your copy have the commentary? I heard there's like I think like only the Japanese copy has like audio commentary, but there's this elusive audio commentary that Gallo does, but I wasn't able to find it.
no, no, this is just bare bones. There's nothing else on here. It claims there's a trailer, but I actually tried to play it and it didn't work. So I don't know if that's a flaw in this particular disc or what, but no, it doesn't have anything like that.
Okay. Yeah, so Gallo's an interesting guy. Very interesting guy when I did this research on him for the movie. Um, and he does some interesting interviews and he does kind of retract a lot of what he says and pedal
Mm,
backwards. He did this really, really good interview that I heard with a Japanese guy. I didn't even know the guy was Japanese until I searched up the interview and I read it was pulled and it was like an exclusive interview. The guy sounded just like, sounded black, honestly. It was like,
oh
hey,
yeah.
what's up? And yeah, I saw his name and it was, Asian name. So I'm pretty sure it was a Japanese interview because um, I heard like maybe he either had Japanese financiers or he's popular in Japan, but I think he was a Japanese guy. But he has a lot of interesting interviews out there. I think what people like about him and what also hurts him is that he's super outspoken.
Mm,
He's outspoken in a way where it's like it's likable, but it's not likable. He's that guy that says that thing. It's like, oh, like that guy's just some like Tarantino's just some like, drug addict and he's all like, and whatever and like this guy's all that and this it's like, oh yeah, like we think that and now you say it like he has no filter. So it
mm,
makes him likable and not likable both at the same time. Um, but super outspoken. But he also like talks down about like not just his contemporaries, but also the people he works with, film critics, things like that. So I think that's why like he doesn't get a lot of work, but also
mm.
why certain groups of people love him because he's the guy that says that thing.
Aha. I know he had a bit of a feud with Roger Ebert.
Uh, yes. Uh, I thought you would have something to say about that. That's why I paused. Okay. Moving on to his feud with Roger Ebert. So this film came out at a time where film critics had a huge impact on movies. There was Siskel and Ebert and Leonard Maltin. You knew who the top critics were. Some of them even had, if not their own shows, they had segments on entertainment shows, and film critics were a thing. Nowadays, film critics are not a thing at all. At most, you have Rotten Tomatoes, where it's more like a website and it's a critic score. Like nobody knows critics anymore. They just know what the critic score is, what the Rotten Tomato score is. Is it fresh? Is it rotten? And that stuff is more so just to drive social media, uh, talk about a movie because a movie can have a bad Rotten Tomato score and do really well because fans of the movie just want to stick it to the critics and like, oh, you gave this movie a really rotten score. Well, watch us. We're going to make it number one at the box office. So it's more like conversational driven. I don't know if it actually hurts a movie if critics don't like it, but this came out at a time where that was a thing. But I don't think in today's society people hear like, oh, this critic didn't like a movie and it torpedoed it and it became a big controversy. I don't know if there's any critic alive who could lambast a movie the way Roger Ebert did with this one and it would be a story or that it would trend.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think you're right that people go to Rotten Tomatoes and they say, oh, yeah, there's 83% people like this. So therefore, I'm going to see this movie. that I don't think they know what any of the individual reviews say. And I had a friend who was really big on Rotten Tomatoes, you know, whenever we were going to go see a movie, and he would say, oh no, that doesn't score well on Rotten Tomatoes. He doesn't want to see it. Or, oh, that's got 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. But then we'd often go to these things and he wouldn't like them, you know? And I would say, well, part of the problem is 80% of the critics gave it a positive review, but they may have only given it like 51%, you know, like it's a little better than you know, a fail, but it's not necessarily a great movie. It's just a lot of people gave it a passing grade. And you know, depending on the type of film, because I think some films like you know, Rambo, when Rambo came out, I think it got like close to 0 on Rotten Tomatoes, but it got a very high score on the IMDb because the fans loved it. It was ultra violent. It was you know, amazing special effects and everything, but critics, of course, just don't like it because it's so violent, it's so nasty, you know, and horror films often have the same problem. You know, some critics just won't like them. So yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know if there's any one critic that people really care about anymore, as much as just what does the majority say about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and his rivalry with Ebert, depending on where you read about it, it was super nasty or it was super friendly. They talked a lot of stuff about each other. You know, Vincent Gallo wished cancer on him. And then Ebert joked back like, your aim was bad because I got one form of cancer and you wish me a different form of cancer. So there was a lot of back and forth, but I did see an interview with Gallo on Howard Stern, and Roger Ebert called in and they were joking back and forth. So I think people who don't like Vincent Gallo, which is a lot of people, will bring this up and they'll bring up some of the funnier things Ebert said, because they both said a lot of like wild stuff against each other. I think Ebert was more so aiming for fun. I think Gallo was being a little bit nasty. Just based on their personalities, that's how they attack each other. But ultimately, they seem to have fun with it. I think once Ebert died, he did eventually die of cancer, that Vincent Gallo kept the rivalry going, so it came off more nasty than I think it would have been if Ebert was there to retort to Gallo's nastiness. But overall, I don't think it was as bad as people make it out to be. I think if you don't like him, you'll make it out to be nastier than it was, and be like, oh, Ebert owned him, or Ebert said this, and you know, Gallo said that. But ultimately, taking that rivalry out of it, critics did not like this film at all.
Yeah, that was my impression. Did not do well critically.
Yeah, another thing too at the time that's not a thing now is film festivals and how film festivals could impact the film. I don't know if a modern audience could even name a film festival. When you had Sundance and Cannes, and when you had independent films come out in the early 2000s or in the 90s, winning some of these film festivals or doing well in some of these film festivals could really explode your film. I think maybe the last film that had any impact with a film festival was maybe Paranormal Activity. But in the last, you know, decade or so, maybe even 2 decades, I don't know if a film winning a film festival means anything to a film nowadays. But back then it had a lot of power and say, especially with low budget independent films, on whether you would get distribution or not. And this, you know, historically was one of the worst films ever to debut in a festival, was booed, people walked out of it at the Cannes Film Festival, and along with Roger Ebert saying a lot of negative things, that kind of impacted this film as well and helped to make it more infamous than famous or successful.
Yeah, I think the funny thing about film festivals, it does help your film. Like if you play at festivals, that does help, and it does give you a better chance of getting distribution. But I've seen quite a few films that, you know, if you look at the poster or the box art, they'll have like 50 laurels from different film festivals. You know, this movie played at all these different film festivals, and it often won, you know, it won awards at all these different film festivals. And then you watch the movie and it's not very good, you know, and you look it up and people don't like it, you know. So So it's like there's two different things. There's movies that do well at film festivals, but that doesn't necessarily translate to movies that do well in the real world. It's like film festivals are looking for something else, and it could be something that's going to shock the audience, something that they haven't seen before, which might be the case here, that they felt that there was something shocking about this movie, and it's going to get a lot of attention. People are going to be talking about this movie because that's what you kind of want at your film festival. But ultimately, is it a movie people are going to enjoy? Not necessarily, and I don't know that they care that much. They just program it because they know it's going to help raise the profile of the festival.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I was more so leaning towards the fact that whether people like it or don't like it at the festivals, that festivals are kind of meaningless now. Especially as a filmmaker. When I first started making films, festivals were the end all be all. Like, what festival can you get in? How can you get into these festivals? Paying the fees to have your film even be viewed at a festival, there was a fee to pay. Then if it was accepted, there was another fee to pay. It was this cottage industry of the way people made money off of independent filmmakers trying to get their films exposure. Honestly, I don't know if winning a festival means anything to a film with distribution, especially when you're talking about you can release things digitally and straight to streaming, and how much does even making it into a theater even impact your film? I just think they're meaningless now. I don't think anyone cares. I think if you put a film out that says it won the Cannes Film Festival or it got 90% of Rotten Tomatoes, I think if people like the poster, I think if people like the trailer, they're going to watch it. They could care less about the Rotten Tomatoes score, or they could care less about like how many film festivals it won. I think in certain ways that hurts films if the critics support it too much, or if there's too much buzz about it, because then there's this like, oh, you're trying to say I'm supposed to like this film? Don't tell me what to do. I'll make my own mind up. I think there's more of an attitude like that nowadays, and like, don't push your narrative on me. And you can spill that out beyond that. Just the way media is right now, people are very distrusting of the media, going beyond film, just media in general, because they know they're hyper aware of narratives and people pushing narratives on them, and they just completely reject that.
Yeah, well, I know even for myself, I'm suspicious. If I see a movie gets 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like, what is wrong with this movie that every critic likes it? This must be not edgy in any way. This must be really boring, because there's got to be somebody who's offended by this movie.
Yeah, right? It's got to be like homogenized and pasteurized.
Yeah, like it's just so boring that, okay, everybody gives it a mild thumbs up, but it's probably not going to be that interesting.
Yeah, it's funny because Vincent Gallo did say something interesting. Like, I don't agree with a lot of the stuff he says, because he said a lot of wild things, a lot of offensive things. He's completely homophobic. He's anti-Semitic. He's anti-Black. Comes off racist. He says a lot of things. He's completely unfiltered. Again, which is why some people love him. He almost has this Trump type feel to him, and why a lot of people hate him. But he did say, and this was over 20 years ago, he brought up like woke culture, and he was like, these movies are terrible and people only like them because they pander to certain audiences. He's like, if you pander to this audience, critics are just going to love you. Your film can be god awful, but because you pander to this, that people are going to like it. And as much as I disagree with a lot what he says, that is basically what you were just saying, and why people distrust the media, because you can have a movie that's terrible, but if it panders to whatever the social thing going on is, if it has like a lesbian transvestite as the lead character and it's a god-awful movie, but it's pro-trans, people are going to say, oh, well, I can't not like this movie, so I'm gonna give it a 51. I'm gonna give it a passing grade, and then everyone's gonna be afraid to not like it. And it doesn't mean the film is good or bad, but it becomes distrusting because you know that people aren't going to give honest opinions, and it immediately puts people on edge. And he did bring that up. He's like, listen, these other films are viewed as better than mine, but they're not, because they're just pandering to certain audiences, and critics are just going to go with that, and they're not going to go with my movie because I don't pander, so He was saying that way before woke culture was a thing.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I know there's certainly there's a theater festival I can think of where they choose plays based on the content or the idea of the play, not so much whether it's good or not. And you know, it's like, you know, it's basically a festival of plays by women, and for some reason they only produce plays that have something to do with an issue related to being with a woman or being a woman. They're not just good plays written by women, you know, which I find strange. You know, you could produce good plays written by women, but instead they'll produce plays that aren't very good, but they're about eating disorders or something, you know, some issue that affects women. And I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. It's like the idea is more important than whether it's good or not in that situation.
Yeah. Which can make people inherently just not like it when it could be good, because your decision-making process isn't genuine. You're not being genuine in what you're doing. You're more focused on causes than quality. It's like, I'm not going to the theater, I'm not buying this movie, I'm not watching this on streaming, I'm not purchasing this because of some agenda or because of some cause. I just want to watch something good. Stop pushing your agendas on me. And I think that's, again, going beyond film, that's the thing with society right now. It's like, yeah, I'm okay with this sect of people, I'm okay with that sect of people, but don't force your stuff on me. Like, let me breathe, you know? It's like, let me just live my life. Don't like constantly like question like what my stance is on everything, you know? Why should that affect if I just want to sit down and watch a movie? Like, I can't do anything without agendas being pushed on me. And I think there's a lot of angry people out there, and Vincent Gallo was angry a long time ago before it was cool to be angry.
Wow, he's a pioneer of anger.
Yes. He's also a Renaissance man. So again, there's a lot not to like about him, and there's a lot I don't like about him. But he is a Renaissance man. He's a poet. He's a musician. He was a motorcyclist. He does everything in film, write, edit, direct, stuff, everything. So I do have to, and you know, any objective person would have to give it up to him. He's a very talented person.
Mm-hmm. I noticed right at the front end of the Brown Bunny, it says written, directed, edited, and produced by Vincent Gallo. And I know at the end he also is credited as the DOP. And of course, I was reminded of a comment somebody once made about another filmmaker, and they said, well, at least now we know who to blame if we don't like this movie, because he's done everything, right? He's taking credit for it all.
Yeah. Like Roger Ebert says, like I may be fat, but one day I can lose weight, and you'll always be the director of the Brown Bunny, director, right. Star, producer, actor, writer. Yeah. So yeah, I mean he did it all, and there are a lot of people who love this film, prominent people. Jean-Luc Godard, one of the great artistic filmmakers out there, John Waters, Sean Penn, Werner Herzog. There's a lot of people that love this movie. So it's not just this like tiny group of incels that say, oh my gosh, like, yeah, this is the blowjob movie, I love it. Because I get to see like porn in a movie. But there are a lot of people that actually genuinely do like this movie, and do see the artistic merit in it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I must admit, I was one of the people who I'd heard about the notorious blowjob scene, and I knew there was a lot of controversy, and so when I found this DVD, it was like a video store that was going out of business. So they were, you know, basically 20 movies for $20. So you just fill a basket full of movies, and this was there, and I thought, okay, well, I'll buy this for $1 and I'll check it out, you know. And honestly, I didn't really get into it that first time. I just thought, you know, it's kind of boring, not much happens. And then, yeah, there's the notorious scene at the end, but, you know, so what? You know, you got to sit through a lot to get to that. And then, you know, So I just, threw it in a box thinking I'll give it away or I'll do something, sell it or whatever. But thankfully, when you suggested looking at it again, I was able to pull it out. And I must admit that just looking at the first 20 minutes, I thought, wow, this is a much more interesting movie than I thought the first time. And maybe I was too, the hype or whatever of knowing about the notorious scene and, kind of waiting for that scene to happen. And I don't know, just it didn't connect with me the first time, but I can definitely see why people like it, and I can see there is a lot more to it than I had originally thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel we can't wrap this up without also talking about Vincent Gallo's website. And on his website, there is a section for personal services. Not sure if you're aware of this, but Vincent Gallo does offer his services to women. $50,000 for an evening with Vincent Gallo.
Wow.
$100,000 for a weekend with Vincent Gallo. $1
Wow.
million for the sperm of Vincent Gallo. And
oh my God.
While he does like Lenny Kravitz and a few black performers, he's not into giving his sperm to women of color.
Wow.
And he does offer discounts if you are of German descent or you have blonde hair and blue eyes. So there's that side of Vincent Gallo. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention any of that before we wrapped up. So go to Vincent Gallo. I don't know if it's vincentgallo.com, but if you just search Vincent Gallo's website, you will get all of his information. And he's only on social media to delete any other accounts that claim to be Vincent Gallo, because Vincent Gallo just redirects everything straight to his website.
I see. Wow. Well, I didn't know any of that, so that's fascinating. Has anybody ever taken him up on that, I wonder?
I'm sure someone has. I don't know, but I would think that maybe someone took it. I don't know. I we can wrap it.
Yes. So the Brown Bunny. We start with a motorcycle race. Shaky handheld camera, no music. It's a long sequence. I'm talking Doris Wishman long. This goes on a long, long time. And then after 3.5, 4 minutes, we finally see Vincent Gallo. And the back of his jacket says Chloë, which we will find out is his name. And we hear some jazzy music at this point. He loads his bike into a van and he drives off. And there's lots of driving footage. He arrives at a gas station where he meets a young woman. There's actually a very nice shot of him in the background, putting gas into the van where we see the young woman in the foreground. It's quite an interesting artistic shot. And there's a few interesting shots like that throughout the movie. So he talks to this girl and he asks her if her name is Violet. And he makes some reference to her necklace. And there's going to be a scene later in the movie where there's a necklace which has a name on it. And I'm assuming that must be the case here, but I don't think there's a shot of the necklace. I actually backed up the movie to try and see the necklace, and I couldn't see it. So unless I somehow missed it there, but I think that's the implication. And he tells the girl that he's going to California, where he's got another race. And she says she's always wanted to go. He asks her to come with him. And he doesn't really have a very persuasive argument. He just says, please, please, please come with me. Next thing we know, she's leaving a note for her aunt and uncle, and she gets into his van, and they drive to a house, which turns out to be her place. He kisses her, tells her he likes her, and does it again after she gets out of the van. And then she goes into the house to get her stuff. and he drives off without her. So this is the first sort of interesting, significant moment, I think, where I find myself going, okay, what is this guy's deal? What is he doing here? He's just convinced this young woman to run off with him to California, and then he just sort of leaves without her. So was that always his intention? Was this some kind of a cruel joke or something? Or was that a spontaneous change of heart? But it kind of also made me think, this is kind of like serial killer behavior or something. It's like he's luring this young woman to come with him in his van. Is this Henry portrait of a serial killer? Like, what's going to go on here? Is he going to murder her and dump her body somewhere on the road? Or is it I knew, of course, that there's going to be a notorious scene in this movie involving graphic sex, and we think, okay, is this somehow, is this a sex thing? But I don't know. I have no idea. What did you think about this moment?
What did I think of this section of the film, or just that one particular moment?
Well, that moment, or the whole section, if you want.
Oh, those are two different questions.
Well,
They'll take me in two different directions. Because you're framing that one moment in a way where it's a leading question. You're not asking me to objectively look at it. You're asking me to look at it through the lens of, do I think this guy is a creepy serial killer? And I suppose if you just change the score, yeah, it could be a serial killer type moment. It could be, Jeffrey Dahmer. It could be Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. It could be something very creepy if you just kept the same footage and just changed the score. If that's your question, then yeah, it could be super creepy with just a little bit of an edit.
Yeah. Well, did you have any thought as to what was in his mind there? Was he just playing a trick on her, or did he change his mind?
Well, then you're getting into the movie itself and not the specific scenario that you painted for me.
True enough. Well, we can come back to it.
Okay.
So shall I continue then?
Well, I'd like to give my thoughts on the section of the movie without you painting me into a corner trying to manipulate my opinion of the film. So I didn't think any of that you mentioned when I first saw it. I didn't think any of that. In my research for the film, I do see a lot of people that viewed it your way, that there's just a creepy guy with a van, but none of those thoughts popped into my head. I suppose if I was a young woman, then I watched this, or I was theoretically in that position, I could take that point of view. But just looking at the movie as a movie for up until that point that you described, a few things popped into my head. One is reading about that motorcycle scene that starts the movie. It was, I think, like 6 minutes I heard, but overall there were 26 minutes overall that were cut out of the first edit that was shown at cons, that got people to walk out and hate the film. He did mention, Vincent Gallo, the star and director of the film, did mention that it was a rushed version. It wasn't ready for cons, and he had issues with the editor, and it wasn't the version that he wanted to be shown, and that led, in his opinion, to some of the negative response that came from the film. But that opening scene that you talked about being a little long for your taste was even longer in the original cut. Also, I did read that he, I think, raced professionally, or semi-pro with the motorcycle. I thought it was interesting in the sense that the film didn't give us any kind of context to who we're following while the race was going on, who was winning, whether that played a factor into the movie or not, winning or losing the race. They just showed us the footage, which I thought was an interesting way to go, and it was a prelude to how this film is going to play out. I do know that Kirsten Dunst and Winona Ryder were both up for parts in this film. From Vincent Gallo's point of view, the reason they weren't in the film is because he didn't want to deal with agents and dealing with the politics of Hollywood and things like that. And when they became too difficult, he just cut them loose. And he was happier for it that they weren't in the film. So I don't know. I didn't find a clear answer to know what parts they were up for, if they were both up for the same part or if um, they were up for different parts. But I'm assuming that maybe this girl that we saw early on in the film would have been one of them. I think the film works as is. I think the stunt casting of having one of them in the film would have given the film certainly more things to talk about aside from the blowjob scene. But I did find the film interesting, and I also found it interesting that it's not just his character that's weird. Almost every character in the film comes off a little odd, a little bit different. And I wasn't sure if that was an artistic decision in that are we watching things that are actually happening? Are we looking at his version in his mind of how things happened? Did he go into that store and never actually talk to her, maybe just stared at her awkwardly and walked out? Did any of that actually happen? And maybe that's why, maybe it didn't happen, and that's why they don't end up together, because these are all just thoughts in his mind of like how these things would play out, and he's just really just a creepy guy in a van. It's the way the movie plays out, you don't know how to interpret what you're watching. So rather than projecting that he's a serial killer like you did, I was just more passively watching and interested into, you know, what I was watching on screen. I found the movie fascinating up until this point.
Yeah. Well, like I agree that it was very intriguing, and that's a good thing. The fact that I was going, what is this guy's deal? I didn't understand, and that's great. To not know what this guy's trying to do makes me want to watch more. And find out what's he going to do, what's going on here. But yeah, it almost feels like cinema verite, or just like somebody's turned on a camera and they're following him around. The footage of the race. It just feels very, very real. But then there are other moments that feel very artistic, sort of art house, kind of surreal. And yeah, that's an interesting point that this could be in his head. It's really hard to say. But anyway, I'll continue on and we'll see if it'll make more sense as we move forward here. So there's more driving. Saw Focus driving, next day driving, music plays, it's very moody. When the song ends, he pulls up at a house, takes a lot of time in front of the house before he knocks, and then an old woman answers. He calls her Mrs. Lemon, and she's apparently Daisy's mom. We don't know who Daisy is yet, but Chloë tells her that his name is Bud Clay, and that he used to live next door. And so she eventually invites him in, and it's an old couple sitting with him at a table in the kitchen, and it's a very awkward conversation. The old woman doesn't seem to remember him, even though he lived next door and was good friends with her daughter. Interesting thing, there's a bunny in a cage, perhaps even a brown bunny. So perhaps we're kind of getting the title of the movie reflected in this moment here. This bunny, it's apparently Daisy's bunny. He asks about it, and he's a little surprised that that bunny is still around. Daisy's mom says she hasn't heard from her in a long time. She hasn't called. She wishes she knew why that was the case. Bud says they live together in LA. And then the mom says, do you have any children? And he says, no, we were going to have a baby. And then the old woman says, what happened? And there's a long pause. He says, I don't know. And basically, yeah, she just doesn't remember him. And he tells her that she visited them in LA. And she doesn't remember that. And then, they talk about some other things, and then he basically says, I've got to go. And he's back on the highway driving again. Any thoughts about this section?
Yeah, I think things start to develop a little bit more. You get a sense of artistically where he's going. You do see an actual brown bunny, and you don't know if the bunny is significant or it's just a connection with the girlfriend, but you do get a sense that, okay, this journey is going to lead up to him meeting up with the girl, because there's no real plot there, but at least there's no more of like, all right, a goal, and it's going to end with him eventually meeting up with her, and we're going to get pieces of information about their relationship as we go. You do hear about the potential kid, again, more awkward interaction, which kind of reinforces a little bit that this may not be complete reality. Is this the afterlife? Is this, again, just all, is his, the fact that everyone is as awkward as him, again, does lend the possibility like maybe these interactions aren't actually happening. Maybe he just drove up to the house, didn't actually go in, and this is how he's envisioning it playing out. Maybe he did talk to them, but the fact that the awkwardness that he possesses is projected on everyone else makes you kind of skew, do you trust the narrator type situation. And you do see a theme of all of the women having flower names, and you get his full name, Bud Clay. Is he like a rosebud? Is he like a bud, someone that has potential that's going to develop? Clay is a pot of clay. You see like where he's going with some of these symbolic things, and you start to get an idea of what's developing.
Yes, absolutely. There's definitely pieces here that you don't necessarily get the first time you sit through it, but when you watch it a second time, you go, oh, there's a piece here, there's a piece there. There's little clues as to what's going to come later. So yeah, that's very interesting. And yeah, the flower names, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the fact that she doesn't remember him and doesn't seem to know anything about this, like, it does kind of raise the question of, is what he's talking about real? Is he making it up? Is he lying to her? Yeah, it's so, we just don't know, I guess, at this point. So he drives some more. We hear a Gordon Lightfoot song play on the soundtrack. The song ends, and he is inside a pet store, and he eventually looks at bunnies inside the pet store, and he asks questions about the bunnies. How long do they live? And the guy says 5 or 6 years. And he seems really surprised by that. And, I can only imagine this has to do with Daisy's bunny that he was looking at the house. And, how could this bunny still be alive? How many years have gone by? I don't know the answer, but somehow that's all connected there. So he eats, he gets back in the van, he drives off. He arrives at a rest stop, and he pulls in, and there's a woman sitting alone at a table in front of the building, and she watches Bud walk by. He goes over to the drink machine, gets a drink, they look at each other, he walks back past her again, and then he sort of turns and he approaches her. He sits with her. She's older. She looks a bit upset, maybe. He says, "Are you okay?" And she sort of nods yes, and then he kind of starts to embrace her and kiss her, and she kind of goes along with it. And this is a moment that feels very surreal to me. I don't quite know what to make of it, but he seems to get emotional as they kind of continue on kissing and whatnot, and she's sort of comforting him. And then he suddenly gets up and walks away without a word, goes back to the van. She stays sitting and watches him go, and he drives off again. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, a lot. So, are these two lost souls on a highway? A Highway to Hell? Are they in purgatory? The symbolism is endless on what this could be. I think not having dialogue helps. I don't know if dialogue would have enhanced this, because then you have more definitive answers. I think having more questions as to this interaction adds more to the story. And of course, the woman is Cheryl Teague, one of the
Yes.
original supermodels. And you do hear a lot of women in their 20s, and when they post online pictures that aren't photoshopped, and that aren't they don't have like professional makeup artists and hairstylists doing their hair, how brave they are. I'm like, it's brave to not have professional makeup artists and hairstylists do you up for just a picture, it's like that's brave nowadays. Not having Photoshop is brave. So if that's considered brave, this is heroic what Cheryl Teague is doing, because there's a woman twice their age, or if not older, maybe
Hmm.
3 times their age, with no makeup on.
Hmm.
So she definitely looks worn out, weather beaten. And it's not an insult to her. I mean, she's a beautiful woman. She's just an older woman. And again, it's just some tortured soul like him, and they're finding themselves on Love Highway, Highway to Hell. Again, are they in purgatory? Like, where are they? But they are two lost souls, kindred souls. But it's a beautiful moment there. You're right. The stuff with the bunny, you're starting to add up timelines. Like, are we supposed to be like trying to figure out like, all right, like when this happened, when that happened? So there's some intrigue with stuff like that. And I think you also mentioned the music. The music is really good.
Hmm.
And I think it's interesting. Sometimes there are scenes with no music, some scenes with music, and I think all that's done really well. And the movie does have me at this point. I am intrigued as to what's happening and what's going to happen.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, I loved the music, and I'm a big fan of road movies, first of all, and this is clearly a road movie. And I'm also a fan of biker movies, and some of the biker movies you could call existential biker movies. They seem to be kind of about the big questions, and Easy Rider perhaps being the most famous and prominent. And that movie, one of the things I love about that movie is the great soundtrack. When you listen to the great songs playing as they ride down the highway. And I mean, this movie, it is kind of a biker movie. He's not riding his bike down the highway, but he is a motorcycle rider, and he has a motorcycle that's in the back of his van, and he's going across the country. And we are getting the songs, and it kind of works in a very similar way for me. It appeals to me in the same way. Uh, you know, Long scenes of driving with a good song playing. I kind of like that, you know. So, moving along, uh, he drives again, and there's another moody song. And then the song ends, and we see glimpses of a woman kissing Bud in what must be a flashback. She looks kind of like a hippie, long blonde hair, a headband. I'm guessing this is Daisy, but it's kind of hard to tell. I can't even really get a good look at her here. And then we sort of fade out from that, and Bud is asleep on a bed in his underwear. He showers, gets dressed, combs his hair, and then he drives through the mountains, and jazzy music plays, and he drives through the night, and you can see, if you've ever done night driving on the highway, like you can sometimes only see the strips of white on the road, and everything else is pitch black, and it's kind of surreal, to be experiencing that and also to see it in this movie. And he pulls into a gas station, and he winds up driving into the Salt Flats. He stops at the Bonneville Speedway in the Salt Flats, and he races his motorcycle there by himself. And you really can't see anyone. As far as the eye can see, there's nothing. It's just this big white expanse. And if there's a road there, I can't see it. Like, I don't know if this is supposed to be a track of some sort, or if it's just a big flat area. I'm not sure, but he rides off, and it's very loud at first, and then it gets very quiet as he rides away into the distance. Any thoughts on any of this stuff?
Yeah, you had a little bit of a different visual dynamic. No more dirty windshield for a few scenes. I like the dirty windshield. I mean, it's different, and I like the fact that it wasn't cleaned. It makes it look more real world, weathered a little bit. And I think it's just flat, salt flats. I think a lot of movies shoot there. There's certain areas where it's just great visually, where a lot of movies shoot. And I am hyper aware of the fact that it's just him. A lot of these scenes, setting up the camera and walking in front of the lens, because I do that a lot for my movies, where it's just there's no crew, there's no cinematographer. You set up a shot and you walk in front of the scene. So I'm hyper aware of that for a lot of these scenes. It's a little bit obvious, but that doesn't detract for me. But it is noticeable in that scene. You do see some zooming while he's on the bike. So at least for that scene, he had a cinematographer when he was on the salt flats. But yeah, just more moodiness, and just this guy's really tortured, and you're just kind of intrigued. It's like, what has this guy with all of this self-loathing and self-hate, and what got him to this point? So for me, this is intriguing, but I think this is where, or this aspect of the film is why people hate it, because you can have a situation where you have a character that is tortured, and do you tell why they're tortured at the beginning so you know why they're in this state, or do you save it for the end, where then you can recontextualize? Do you contextualize by letting us know, or do you recontextualize by letting us know at the end, and then we rethink what we saw? I think people, based on the reviews, prefer to know at the beginning why this character is the way he is, establish that, then we can know why he's so moody. And I think people get angry because it's like, what the hell is up with this guy? Like, I want to know, like, why am I watching 90 minutes of this guy? Let me know at the beginning why I should care or why I shouldn't care. Like, let me know how to feel about this character, and then maybe I can get more invested. For me, I didn't mind waiting till the end, but I can see why, if you did want to know at the beginning, why this can start getting tedious and frustrating.
Yeah, and I think it's a very common format, especially in modern filmmaking, where it's sort of like the whole film is about understanding what's going on. It's like we don't know what's happening, and it sort of becomes clear at the end, and that's kind of the end of the story. So it fits in with that to me. Like, it doesn't seem inappropriate. But yeah, it's intriguing for sure. And so he drives down the highway again, and he arrives in Las Vegas, and he drives around. He goes past several hookers who offer him dates, and he very politely declines. And I just have to comment that hookers, and my understanding is, hookers don't really like vans, especially vans with no windows. And so I'm a little surprised all these hookers are kind of offering to go with him. They should be a little suspicious. And we're kind of getting back to the Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer here, but interesting. So the third hooker is.
Are you
young.
just trying to tell me you really want to review Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer? Is that your way of telling me that?
Maybe it is. It's a very good movie. But the third hooker is young, and she has a necklace that says Rose, and this time we get a very clear shot of it. And he sort of changes his mind after turning her down, and he circles back around, and he talks to her, and he offers to buy her lunch, and she ultimately agrees, and she's eating food in the van while he drives, and he seems very emotional. He's driving around. They don't talk. He's sort of on the verge of tears, and then he suddenly stops, and he drops her off. He pays her for his time, and he drives off, very emotional. So this is the third woman that he's kind of encountered on his journey here. And she also is a flower named Rose. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, for me, this is where the movie, I guess, emotionally hits me. There are two parts where it really emotionally hits me. This part, and of course the ending, when we get the twist. But when we see the close-up of the name, even on first viewing, you kind of get the whole flower thing, and you kind of get that like he's really just looking for any connection to this girl, and something tragic happened, and anything where it's almost like Vertigo, where it's just like you're just where the character is just looking for every woman he finds, he's just seeing any semblance of the woman that he loved there. And when he gets her in the car and she's I think eating fries and talking, and you see him just breaking down, like about to get into tears, you're like, that part kind of hit me like, what the F happened, you know? And that kind of emotionally hit me, that part of the film. And yeah, I was, from a filmmaking standpoint, I was curious, like, was this one of the roles for either Kirsten Dunst or Winona Ryder? And, how would it have been in this film? I think it's good to have an unknown because you can get more lost in a film with an unknown rather than knowing that you're looking at an actor. But kind of wondering like what were they up for? Was one of them up for this particular part? They certainly would have been more of a crafted actor, but I think the naturalistic acting of just an unknown, just regular person, just in the scene, I think adds something as well to the movie.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it has that ultra realism feel where we're riding in the van with him as he goes around the block, and it's the whole block. Like we don't sort of cut ahead or anything. But then, you have to question, okay, these women all have flower names, and like, is this real or is this surreal? I don't know. It's kind of a weird mix. And I found myself in this moment sort of wondering, is he trying to help these women? Like, is that what he's doing here? Because he's trying to give her lunch. He's not having sex with her. And the other woman who he seems to want to comfort and at the rest stop. And I'm not sure how the first woman fits into that, whether he thinks he's helping her by inspiring her to leave the gas station and go to California. I don't know, but is it somehow that he's trying to help these women? That's kind of the feeling that I was getting at this point. But moving forward again, he drives. He stops at a garage, drops his bike off for a tune-up or a check-in or a test. And then he says he's going to stay in LA tonight, drive to the track in the morning, checks into a hotel. Then he drives to a house, and he approaches the house and rings the bell. No answer. He calls out Daisy. No answer. A neighbor eventually says no one's there, which left me questioning, do they mean nobody's there at all? Like the house is abandoned, or just nobody's home at the moment? It's not really clear. And he gets back in the van, and then we see more flashbacks, I presume, of him kissing Daisy, and this time I'm pretty sure it's Daisy. He tries knocking on the door and calling out for Daisy again, and then he leaves a note on the door. Then back at the hotel, he sits on the bed, picks up the phone, and he tells the front desk, hey, someone may be calling me or showing up. Her name's Daisy. If she shows up, just let her up to the room. He goes into the bathroom, washes his face, and then when he goes back to the main room, Daisy is somehow there. She's inside the room, which kind of is impossible in a way. So kind of, again, questioning, is this real or is this surreal? Is this in his head? And then she says she needs to use the bathroom. She goes in and smokes some crack, I think, and comes back out, and a fairly long scene begins. But before we get into that, do you have any thoughts on any of this stuff leading up to this moment?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I think you mentioned the hyperrealism or the realism of some of the stuff that we're watching. Kind of reminds me of John Cassavetes, where his movies are so highly praised. I think they came out of like 30 some years before this, over 30 years before this one. A lot of his older movies even longer than that. So, you know, it's more original when Cassavetes was doing this stuff, but it's kind of similar in a way. And, you know, with the Cassavetes stuff, when it's overly praised, you kind of tend to want to, like, you know, maybe it's not as great. And when this is like completely crapped on, you kind of want to defend it, you know. And I'm not saying this is on the level of a Cassavetes or which one's better, but perspective does, you know, matter. When you're seeing this hyperrealism and people are overpraising it, you tend to say, well, calm down. And then when you get a movie that's crapped on like this with doing the same thing, you kind of like defend it a little bit. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of an odd dynamic in that we did watch a Cassavetes film where we kind of push back on like the overpraising of it, and here we're defending something basically doing the same thing, just based on you know, the reception of the film. But I do like the realism in this, just like I liked it in Woman Under the Influence, to a point, you know. But I think with this is all seems to be leading up to something, which we're going to get to, I guess, in the final segment. Whereas Cassavetes, I didn't feel like with Woman Under the Influence, the build-up really led to a good payoff. Where the journey may have made a little bit more sense with Woman, the ending really kind of fell flat. With this one, the journey it's more intriguing than interesting, and this movie needs a good payoff. If this movie didn't have a good payoff, you wouldn't really be looking at all the build-up as to being anything special. It needed a good payoff, and I think this movie, the next segment, really, I think for me, is what makes the movie work. The fact that there is a payoff. So I don't mind the hyperrealism in either film. And I just want to bring this up because I think we were kind of hard on the Cassavetes film, in that when you do a movie like this, where you're dealing with the hyperrealism and you're going for the naturalistic stuff, and you're not doing entertaining scene after entertaining scene, and the point is at the end of this is going to pay off, you need to then pay off. If you're not going to pay it off, be entertaining, you know? And I think with this movie, the ending really is why I look back at it a little bit more fondly than I do Woman Under the Influence, which overall may be a much better film. The reason I don't look at it as fondly is because there was no payoff. But I do like the payoff in this, which is coming up next.
Yes, absolutely. She does some crack. She comes back in the room. She wants to touch him, but she's not sure that he's going to agree to that. You know, she says, you don't like me anymore. Talk about how it used to be, was sitting on his lap and stuff like that. She apologizes for looking ugly now, looking terrible, which I'm not sure I quite agree with, but she apparently feels that she doesn't look as good as she used to. She goes back into the bathroom, does more crack, and then she takes what she says are antibiotics for her allergies. She offers to go buy booze, but he says he doesn't drink anymore since the last time they saw each other. So, you know, she wants to kiss him. She talks about kissing him. She only wants to kiss him, she says, and he kind of says it's not true, that she kissed other boys. And then she talks about this chocolate bunny that he bought for her. So again, we're getting the brown bunny here. And she ate the whole bunny and she threw up, and he kissed her anyway. You used to like me. I wish you still liked me like that. And she says, well, I do like you, and I've liked you for my whole life. And she wants him to say he loves her. He doesn't seem to want to do that. And eventually they start to kiss and make out. And this brings us to the notorious scene, the very graphic blowjob, the unsimulated sex, as they say. And the talk kind of gets intense during this moment. You won't suck anyone else, but wait, I saw you. Why did you do that? Why did you suck that other guy? Why did you fuck them? And then after he's done, he accuses her of being a whore. You fuck them, you fucking asshole. I hate you so much. All this kind of stuff. And he says he doesn't love her anymore. And she's like, well, I love you, and can't we be a couple again? And no, it's a mistake. I should have never asked you to come here. And she sort of says, I'm sorry that this happened. I never meant to hurt you. And then he says, why did you do it? I saw you talking to those guys. And then we get flashbacks to what happened. And this is sort of the crux of it here. And so basically we get the sense that she was raped, maybe. Maybe I shouldn't use that word. She was sexually assaulted. She was sexually assaulted at this party by several men. And he saw her and maybe misinterpreted it and thought she was just having sex with these guys. And she says, no, you know, I took drugs, I passed out, they assaulted me. And then he says, you know, why did you take drugs? Because I'm an addict. You made our baby die. She was pregnant. She shouldn't have been taking anything. So then she asks why he didn't do something to help her. You know, she was unconscious. You just left me there. Why didn't you help me? I would have helped you. And he says, I know. And he sees all the horrifying details of everything in the flashback, and then he sort of leaves, and he walks home, but then he comes back, and there's an ambulance there, and he says, why is there an ambulance? Because I was dead. I died, bud, she says. I got sick, and I choked. So presumably like some famous rock stars who choke on their own vomit and die. He denies it, but anyway, after the flashback ends, he's alone, and then we see him driving on the highway again, one more time, and there's a freeze frame, and that's the end of the movie. So, thoughts?
So a lot happens in the last few minutes of this film, and again, if you're not someone that is into finding out what happens and having something be recontextualized for you in the very last part of the movie, I can completely understand why you don't like this film, because even rewatching this, I'm like, geez, like everything that makes me like this film hasn't happened yet. It's a 90-minute film and we're like 80 something minutes into it. I was shocked at how late in the film everything that makes this film good happens. First of all, what makes this film infamous is the blowjob scene, which happens, I think, within the last 7 minutes, less than 10 minutes to go. And personally, I do a lot of films that have a lot of sexual stuff in them. I don't think real sex is necessary. And even if it's real sex, you don't have to show the real parts. And who knows how we would remember this film if there wasn't a real blowjob. But you could do a graphic fake blowjob. I mean, it's a blowjob. Like, just there are ways to manipulate the camera to make it look super real and it not be real. Or there are ways where if you want to just get a real blowjob, you can edit in a way where we can't tell it's real. Or you could just have a graphic sex scene with a bunch of nudity, but you don't have to have real acts happening. And again, if it wasn't infamous for those scenes, would we still be talking about it? But if those scenes didn't happen, you still have a movie that I like. Like, the blowjob being real didn't make me say, I like this movie. I like this movie because I like this movie. Maybe I wouldn't have given it as much of a chance, but I think it's a good movie, real or no. And this movie did ruin careers. I mean, it ruined Gallo's career. He didn't make another feature after this. And Chloë Sevigny, like her agency fired her, which is weird that your agent who you pay can fire you, but her agency dumped her after this. And who knows what the trajectory of her career was. Honestly, this was kind of in line with what she was doing, because the other movie that made her big was Kids, which is a movie we should probably do at some point. But that ends in a similar way. It ends with a graphic scene. It wasn't a real sex, but it was a graphic sexual scene with a twist at the end. So it's really similar to this in a way. Graphic sex, horrifying twist. They both end very similar. But you know, this kind of, you could say this derailed her career. I don't know what her trajectory was, but it certainly didn't help her career. There was no benefits for this movie for anyone involved in any kind of a way. Um, so I didn't think that, because again, we have to talk about that. I didn't think the realness of the blowjob was necessary. Getting past that, a few minutes later, we get the twist. I thought the twist was brilliant, and it's what, again, recontextualizes everything and makes me like this movie, is that twist. Without the twist, I don't think I would like the movie, because then you wouldn't have the context. And it's kind of the reason why I'm not that big of a fan of A Woman Under the Influence, because the ending didn't make everything else pay off. And I think you were asking, did he know, did he not know that she was raped? I think he did know she was raped. And that's what makes it so tragic. He was a coward. He saw her getting raped, and instead of doing something, he cowered away. And I think that's what makes it so tragic, is that not just that his girlfriend died, his pregnant girlfriend died, but he chose not to do something because he was too scared. He saw these men, and he was this coward, and he cowered away, and he didn't do anything. And also he talked about the drugs and the alcohol, and Vincent Gallo himself is against drugs. So he said, why do you do drugs? Why you do? And Vincent Gallo himself is very anti-drug. So that message, was a genuine one as well. But I thought the twist is what really made this work. And my first time watching it, when he leaves a note on the door for her, he visits the parents. He says to the guy at the front desk, if anyone comes for me, just tell him to come straight up. All of that made me think that he was going to meet her and she's real. And when she says, I died, I was like, oh shit, she's dead? It's like, for me, like, yeah, everyone can say they saw the twist coming, just like The Sixth Sense. Yeah, I saw it coming. Maybe you did. In certain movies, you can see it coming. For this particular movie, I didn't see it coming. I'm like, oh shit, she's dead. Like, he's just in a room by himself masturbating, and oh shit, like, it made me rethink the whole movie in my head, like oh shit, this and that, and that's what made me love this movie.
Yeah, I didn't see the twist coming either, and I think it does make a lot of things make sense, and it does kind of make the movie work. I agree. I don't think that the real sex is necessary, although I do think that maybe that is the reason that most people watch the movie. I think the word got out, there's real sex in this. Oh, I got to check this out, so yeah, maybe it wouldn't have done anywhere near as much business if it didn't have that. But I mean, even the way it's shot as it is, you can't see a lot. Like there are moments where you see it, but there's a lot of moments where you can't see it. Her head is blocking the action. It sort of made me think about some of the golden age adult films, which they would do two cuts of. They would do a hard cut and they do a soft cut, and you can use those shots in the soft cut where her head is blocking the action. So it would be very easy to remove the actual hardcore shots and just have it be softcore. Would it be better or worse? I'm not sure. But one thing I did find interesting is reading that Vincent Gallo apparently is very anti-pornography, and that he actually intended this to be in some way anti-pornography, which I mean, I don't think it really works in that way. I don't really see.
Well, it's not very erotic.
Well, that's what people say, and I mean, yeah, I suppose, but
because I think like a movie with a real sex scene that would have worked is like Basic Instinct. or like Fatal Attraction. If you say a movie like that, an erotic movie, that's a great movie, but the sex is real. To me, a real sex scene in those would elevate it. People would watch that and like it. I think a real sex scene in this makes people angry because it's like, if you're coming for this to masturbate or to be eroticized or to watch it with your girlfriend, this is depressing, slow-paced movie. You know, if you got your Vaseline and your tissues, you're going to be disappointed, you know? Or if you want to watch this with your significant other, as in a movie to arouse you guys or to enjoy it with your loved one, this movie's going to disappoint you because that's not what this is, you know? It's not an erotic film. So I do think it's an anti-pornography film in a way. And in fairness to Vincent Gallo, in the era of Me Too, or in a situation where Chloë Sevigny was hurt career-wise by this movie, she never once said she was coerced. She never once abandoned the film. She even said she loved the film after it was made. She helped promote the film. So there was no shenanigans done behind the scenes. This wasn't a Harvey Weinstein situation. She wasn't manipulated. She wasn't forced. And as much as people want her to say that, people would love for her to say that because they hate Vincent Gallo, she never said anything even close to that. And even in an interview, I think he was doing an interview on some music station, and Mila Jovovich called in because she was promoting one of her Resident Evil sequels. She even talked about, like, she loved Gallo, and Gallo offered her the part in Buffalo 66, his first feature, and he offered her the part in this. Gallo said he didn't even remember. Mila was like, "No, I remember. You said you were doing some porn film and you wanted me to star in it." And she's like, I'd love to work with you, but I didn't want to do real acts in front of the camera. But she said she loved the film and she would love to work with him. So in fairness to him, even when he was pitching it to actresses, he didn't say, "Oh, this is some high art film." No, she said that he pitched it to her as a porn. So there was no shenanigans as far as that goes.
Yeah, that's true. And they used to be a couple at one point, right? Chloë Sevigny and
Yeah,
Vincent Gallo.
so based on the interviews, he said before he called her about the movie, they hated each other and that they had a falling out. So, and then in other interviews, they did make reference to the fact that they dated at some point during the making of the film, but he did say it took him 4 years to make the film. So I don't know if the falling out was a professional falling out, and then throughout the course of the film, they started dating at some point. But he did also say that when he called her about the film, he said, "Don't tell your agent, don't tell your boyfriend," because he said she was in a committed relationship. "Just think about this, and if you want to do it, you do it, but don't share anything with them." So it could be that she did keep it to herself because her agency did fire her once it came out, and she did date him for a while, so maybe she ended up breaking up with her boyfriend. But uh, it's hard to find the exact timeline for when things happened, but it did seem at some point they dated. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting back to the anti-pornography, I mean, there are adult films from the golden age of adult cinema that are also talked about as not being particularly erotic. Cafe Flesh, I think, is one that people really like because it's a really interesting movie. It's sort of sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, and it does have, of course, real sex in it, but people say it's not really erotic. You know, it's not an erotic film, but it's a cool, weird adult film. So it's not unprecedented in a way to have, you know, unerotic sex, I suppose, in an adult film. So, and in this case, yeah, I mean, it's not particularly erotic, but the stuff where it gets really, like people say, you know, it deals with all this emotional pain and all this negativity and everything. But most of that comes after the actual, you know, the real sex has already happened. And then we get into the really dark stuff after that. So the stuff that's happening during the sex, you know, he's saying things to her, but it's kind of, it's not out of line with what you might see in an adult film. where you say that, a dominatrix is talking to a guy and saying nasty things to him, or, I'm going to have sex with other men and you're going to watch, or whatever, like it doesn't seem like it's completely out of line. So it just didn't strike me as, oh, this is really anti-porn. Like I wasn't getting a message from it saying this is anti-porn. I was surprised to read that later.
Yeah, I didn't get the message as anti-porn, but I also didn't find it erotic.
No. No, I agree. It wasn't really erotic, but it didn't feel like, oh, he's making a point about porn here. And it struck me that if you were really anti-porn, why would you even have real sex in it? Like just do the simulated sex. But I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, I like the film. I think I made that clear throughout the course of the review. I do like it, and 95% of why I like it is the twist at the end. It recontextualizes everything and gives everything a purpose. And you kind of want things to have a purpose. Life has no purpose. I mean, we try to give life meaning. That's why we make up all these gods and all these karma and all this bullshit. None of that really matters. None of that means anything. We just put it there because we don't want to believe life is meaningless. Life is just about survival. We have a survival instinct. And then we try to say, well, I invent this God, and I invent this God, and I invent this philosophy, and I invent that philosophy, because we don't want to believe we're just these creatures that just exist for a period of time, and then we stop existing. We want to believe that we'll continue to exist, and every single thing we do has a purpose, and God put me here to do this, and God put me here to do that, and everything I did to this moment, I did in my life led up to this moment. We want to believe in things like that, and cinema gives us that fiction to believe in stuff like that, and when you're watching it, you don't want to feel like it's life, or it's just like a bunch of random stuff happened and then it ends. And that's kind of how I felt about Woman Under the Influence. A bunch of random shit happened, and then we get some wacky music at the end. That's life. You want to believe that, like, all of this weird and painful things, like it all was, there's all purpose to it. And even though this purpose was something bad, at least there's meaning to what you were watching, and you weren't just watching a bunch of random scenes of some dude moping around in dirty windshields and in a van, like a rape van that you're calling it. But it was this deep, meaningful story, and it was a sorrowful story. It was a tragic story. And I think in the original cut at Cannes, before the 26 minutes came out, it ended with him crashing the car, and then you saw Brown Bunny hop off, and then the movie ends. I like that ending. It brings it full circle with the Brown Bunny, and he dies at the end, which I think this character, I don't know, you could look at it one or two ways. Like, he did a fucked up thing. He could have saved his girlfriend, but he didn't. Not only did he not save her from being raped, and he also left, and he could have, even after she got raped, he could have helped her and not let her just choke on her own vomit. He took the worst possible thing he could do. The worst possible outcome is what happened with him. So you can say the longer he lives, the more of this misery that we see him go through he deserves. Or you can also say, like, maybe death is what he deserves, or maybe being put out of his misery what he deserves. But I think maybe him dying would have been a cool way to end it, bring finality to everything. But either way, the twist is what made me like it, whether he died at the end or not, because it added meaning to what I watched. And I would definitely recommend the movie, unless you're squeamish about watching real sex on film, which the rate of where we watch porn, I don't think people really are really that offended. People pretend to be offended when it's mainstream. When it's mainstream, it's like you could watch John Wick kill 80,000 people in a movie and watch it with your kid. But the minute like there's anything sexual, it's like, oh, cover your eyes. Like, oh, watch John Wick like blow someone's head off and like dance in his guts and drink his brains in a smoothie. But the minute like you see a tit flash on screen, it's like, oh, cover your eyes, So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy to stuff like that when it comes to the mainstream media, but when it comes to pornography, like there's so much porn consumed on the internet. So unless that offends you, the real sex scene, this movie is definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, for sure. And what you were saying there about that ending, that I kind of like that too. I hadn't heard that about him dying in the brown bunny. That would have been an interesting end. I was going to say that I'm not sure where his journey starts and where it ends in this movie, because we don't really see him before his current moody journey, and we don't really see him after. He just kind of continues on this sort of moody drive down the highway. But giving it that ending would have actually been, I think, a good ending, and I like that. And I guess, I don't know, like, in terms of the ending as it is, like, does that experience with Daisy at the end of the movie, is that some sort of cathartic experience for him? It doesn't seem to be, because he just gets back in the truck and sort of is driving on down the highway. So it's not like, oh, I finally faced the truth, I can now start to heal. Like, you don't really get that sense from it.
No, I think that ending is mainly for us, the audience. I think, I mean, for people who don't like the movie, again, it's not only is it not set up, part of the setup is that we see a different version of him and he changes, like it's not just that, like, he's giving us context at the end. Context at the beginning also gives you a different version of the character. So it's not just like where the context happens matters in the storytelling, but it also helps with the character development, because if we saw the context at the beginning, we may have seen a different version of him, and then the tragic thing happened, then he changes. So it's not just knowing why he's the way he is, but seeing a change in his character. And you're not going to see that change at the end, because that stuff already happened. It's just us seeing it happen. So there was no cathartic moment for him, because that's just who he's been. We're just seeing why he's been that way. So there would be no reason for him to change, because he's always known that information. We just didn't know that information. Which, again, it's a legitimate critique. I'm not saying this movie is without critique, or that the critics don't have a point. There is a point to some of these, these critiques. But I think that's why, like, there's no change, because he's always known it, just we didn't know.
Yeah. Well, for me, I like the movie. I like it because I enjoy things like biker movies where you see the endless driving down the highway and you hear the music. I love the moodiness of it. I love the feel. And I love those kind of questions of what's going on with this guy? Like, why is he doing this? Why is he behaving this way? And then we do kind of find out in the end. We kind of get that explanation, and that kind of makes it all come together. So, I'm kind of surprised by how much I enjoyed it the second time, because the first time I didn't really click into it at all. I think I was just kind of, coming to it because of the notorious scene and the controversy, and just sort of wanting to see what is this all about. And it just didn't seem to connect with me. But watching it a second time, I really found it quite interesting and quite enjoyable.
We can end it there.
All right.
What movie are we doing next week?
Well, we were originally talking about Fury, but now is it October though? We're now saying maybe we
can do Fury like the first November movie, maybe.
Yeah, because people talk about Noirvember now, right?
Oh, really?
Noirvember. So you can.
Well, then Fury's not a noir, though. Then we'd have to push off Fury even more.
True. Yeah, it's not quite a noir, but that would be an idea too, to do noir films in Noirvember.
So we're gonna go with the horror stuff.
Yeah, well, I like that idea. That makes sense to me.
Which of these horror movies did you want to do? Vampire, Eyes Without a Face, Hour of the Wolf, Wicker Man, Exorcist, Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, The Lighthouse. One of those movies, one of the newer movies we talked about, maybe.
Well, I mean, we were already talking about Vampire, and it would make sense that would be the oldest one, right? That we would be
Vampire next
doing.
week, then?
So, yeah, I mean, why not? That makes sense to me.
Keep this onto one fucking podcast.
Yeah, well, I can't believe that went over. I guess
it went a lot over, honestly, because
I know.
I'm sure we're probably like 20-25 minutes into this one, so
yeah. But I mean, once we went over, it was like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
Take our time now.
True point. Yeah.
But I gotta.
Vampire has no dialogue. I mean, we said that with Doris Wishman. Like, we didn't think that would go pretty far. But I don't see Vampire going that long because it has no dialogue. It's just a silent film. And it's pretty short, so.
Yeah. And
watch that take us like 4 episodes to go through Vampire.
Exactly, you know. Well, and I mean, I almost said with a movie like this one, The Brown Bunny, like you can summarize it in like 2 minutes, or you can really sort of take a long time because there's a lot of images and
I'm sure there's some critics that probably reviewed this movie in like 5 minutes. A guy drives around a van and then gets a blowjob at the end.
That's right. That's exactly. You could summarize it very fast, but if you want to talk about any interesting,
he drives around a van all day moping and he gets a blowjob at the end. Oh, big twist!
Yeah.
It was a ghost blowjob. She died. Yeah,
and it doesn't even cheer him up. You know.
Yeah,
that's the thing. He's still sad at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.